Hello, welcome to Into the Rift. I am not Daniel Tsufa Dracos. I know everyone is very sad about that. But I have a bunch of panelists here with me today who should make up for the fact that I'm not Daniel Tsufa Dracos. I have Emily Rand, who will be
Woo!
talking about a lot about the wild card and some about LCK and LPL as usual, Rights for LL Esports. I have our special guest today, Jacob Braille, also known as the magical caster of MSI. No, I had to go there.
Okay.
Writes for some Daily Dot and used to write for Esports Heaven. What do you do? Anything else now? Like, let me know.
Uh, no, that's it for
No.
now.
Okay, you're good. Okay. Then we've got Razzleplasm, who will be talking to us about the Chiefs. I
Oh
am
my God,
sure.
please.
We've got it's good. We've got Emily and Raz to talk about the two teams that were supposed to be good but actually weren't. And then we have
Wow, so much shade throwing already.
The saltiness is coming out.
um, and then he also follows a lot of LPL and LSPL. And then we have is that it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
I believe
Okay.
that's everybody.
yeah.
Good. Good stuff. Obviously, this is off to a great start. I don't really care. I forget how many people are on the show. Um, we're going to be covering the International Wild Card Tournament. As I said before, we're going to talk about some North American roster news. I won't bore you with the Chinese stuff because there's not really anything to report, just a bunch of random stuff happening as usual. We're going to talk maybe briefly about the introduction of Team TDK since we have some people who know about TDK. But mostly we're going to be talking a lot about the LCK games, SK Telecom versus CJ, and the LPL third place and finals match. So, as we gear up for the midseason invitational, let us start with the wild card, the seed that people probably care the least about going into midseason invitational,
Mhm.
but that a
Sure.
lot of people in this on the show actually were very invested in the wild card tournament. So we had a few teams that were projected to do pretty well. The we had INTZ from Brazil, the Chiefs from the Oceanic region. I think were projected to be like third or second best, and then we had the Besiktas, correct? Yeah, I'm saying this.
Besiktas or something. Besiktas.
Besiktas.
I'm
I
really
have no
having fun
idea.
with that
The
name.
Turkish team, I'm very sorry. Welcome to Tallahassee, by the way, guys. It's a very beautiful place. I'm sure you're glad that you won a trip there and not somewhere else useful in the world.
Mhm.
Um, but those teams were kind of projected to be on top, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say so. I think that was
Could
the general
you?
consensus.
So that sort of is what worked out. I know. Also, we had the Thailand team in the finals. It's still so weird to me that Bangkok Titans was the number one Southeast Asian team. I
Mhm.
guess technically they weren't. The Saigon Fantastic Five couldn't make it, but
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about those teams insofar as we can discuss what went wrong with Chiefs, what went wrong with INTZ, and how the Besiktas took the event. So let's start with Emily, we talk a lot about Brazil on this show. Tell me a little bit about what happened leading up to this tournament for INTZ, how they did at the tournament, and maybe your thoughts on like what went wrong.
Okay, so INTZ, for if anyone is tuning into the show and they haven't like heard me wax poetic about INTZ or talk about them at all, basically they're the top team in Brazil. They had their first split final um, a few days before they had to be in Turkey. And that ended in a 3-0 sweep of the second place team, Vivo Fee Brigade Stars. And so they flew out and they arrived in Turkey within about 24 hours of the event. I know, I think Macau did an interview. Like, they had to go in and they had to do, like, a bunch of stuff, like promotional stuff, and then they went and trained because they're apparently crazy. And, like, they're a hardworking team. I will say that. They had a really minimal amount of time. So the first day, they did not look good at all because they were, they just they hadn't slept in several days. And the second day they came out and kind of showed a little bit better. And then the third day they only had one game and they just kind of kind of decimated the other team in under 18 minutes. So going into the final, they looked really, really good. I'll say that from people who watched the Brazilian final, the CBLOL final, it's kind of deceptive in terms of how the team actually works. They're typically a very early to mid-game focused team. They have been throughout the entire season. I know I saw a lot of people looking at the final and saying, oh, okay, this team kind of starts slow and then they finish. That's actually not what they do for the most part. And I think they did show that in the final against Besiktas because their problems were not in team composition. It was in the execution, particularly mid to late and then late game shot calling. And I think for INTZ, and I know I interviewed, there's a Portuguese interview with Revolta where their jungler, where he kind of says we were kind of affected by the crowd and the scope of the event and all this stuff. And I think it brings up, I personally am really sad to see that they did not win because I think they are a legitimately good team. And I think if they had played their best, they would have won, but they didn't. So I think it brings up for me a lot of questions about what happens in a wildcard region when you get to be the best and you are kind of stomping your competition across the board. How do you then break that to become better on an international level? And for Brazil specifically, and Raz can back me up in terms of how it works in Oceania as well, it's very hard to get scrim partners after a certain point. And it's very hard if you're consistently beating your competition and you cannot find other competition. So, because basically losing is not always a bad thing. So if they go to Europe and they scrim European teams, I'm not saying they did, but I'm saying if they do and they just get swept or whatever, I feel like as long as those scrims aren't stomps, there's stuff to take from that. There's always a lot more things, in my opinion, that you can take from a loss than you can from a win, especially if you're kind of decimating your competition, because you have to look at it and be like, well, I know you didn't get punished for this mistake, but this was a mistake, so don't do that when you're up against better competition. So for me, just in general, following Brazil and kind of loving that region, it brings up a lot of questions for me that are like, okay, how does this region become more competitive? Because once you reach a certain cap, it's difficult to expand beyond that if you can't find better competition to punish you for the mistakes that you're making, if that makes sense. So I liked Revolta's attitude in that interview I mentioned. It's on my CNBs in Portuguese, but he kind of says, we're just using this as a learning experience, and we're going to take it and we're going to learn as much as we can while we're here, and we're going to become a better team for it. And this is kind of the first time that we had to sit there, with smiles on our faces and kind of take the loss. And I think that was a really good experience for us. I think we grew as a team. So, I'm happy to hear that, and I hope they continue having that attitude.
So, let me be a little bit devil's advocate here. So you're saying at one point you brought up far back in this explanation. Sorry for the long question initially, but you said that you think that they're an early mid-game focused team typically. Do you think that the meta change recently had any effect on them playing going into the tournament? Do you think that they looked less controlled? Because you said that in the finals of CB Law, they played longer games, right? So do you think that, the meta change hurt INTZ's dominance over Brazil and their overall strength going in? Because we saw teams that were really strong pre-patch playing those early to mid game styles suffer, like Jin did in Korea, for example. TIP did in North America. To an extent, we saw some other teams in China also suffer a little bit. I guess less so in Europe because we have Fnatic and Unicorns of Love. But just give me your thoughts on that a little bit.
I do think it affects their team, but I think they came up with some really good compositions. Like Yang on Shyvana was just absolutely a monster in some of those games. So I think it did affect them. I think, in my opinion, when I've seen them execute those early to mid game compositions that are a lot quicker, because their best players, their jungler Revolta, and he does a really good job of controlling tempo on Rek'Sai, on Nidalee, on Lee Sin, and these kind of junglers that are really quick and mobile and can kind of dictate the pace of the game very early and very fast. I'm not saying that he was bad on Gragas or Sejuani. He wasn't. But it changes the dynamic of the team. And I felt like when they got into some of these later games and they had to make late game decisions, they didn't always make the right decision. And that's really what it came down to. So like I know a couple of comments I got, people were asking me like, oh, it seems like INTZ plays a lot of compositions, because they played a ton of different compositions throughout this tournament. And they're kind of like, so what do they actually play? I'm really confused as to what this team does. And I think it's cool. They're a cool team because they do have a lot of players with really deep champion pools. I think they need to work on those late game compositions when it comes to their shot calling, and I do think the patch did affect them. I think we didn't see it until they got on an international level and they had to deal with other nerves and potentially better teams going up against them and punishing them for those mistakes that they did make. So yeah, I definitely do think it did affect them. I'm not saying that they can't be good on this patch, because I think, again, they showed some really good things. They had some really good ideas. Revolta had some really nice Sejuani and Gragas play. I thought Yang Shyvana was very good. So I think they have the right pieces if they can think about what their mistakes were in those games and kind of hone in on that and work on developing that.
So I guess ultimately the question comes down to, do you think the best team won between, you might not know as much about the Turkish region or Besiktas, but just on that day, obviously, do you feel that Besiktas was overall the better team?
Yes, I would say so. I don't think that INTZ is a worse team than Besiktas. I think they're actually a better team overall. But I think on that day, yes, they were.
But do you think that so what makes you say that overall you think INTZ is a better team than Besiktas?
Just their execution of games throughout the tournament, and really, really specific things in game, I guess, in terms of wave manipulation, stuff like that. I think where INTZ messed up, in my opinion, is their kind of late game team fighting was really not what I'm used to seeing from that team at all. And I think Besiktas definitely out-team fought them, very, to a significant degree.
In a way, we see this a lot. The team fights better in the late game wins. We saw that in theory in China in the final. We saw I I think arguably you could maybe would say well, how do people feel about the argument that Besiktas is better on the patch in that case? Like other people can pitch in if they want.
I think one thing we need to consider, and Emily brought it up a bit, but from what I know, Besiktas got the scrim a lot of the European teams. Specifically, from what I heard, a lot of the top tier Turkish teams were scrimming with Rocket, who absolutely 3-0 stomped their opponent in the promotion tournament. And in their similar fashion, Destination Focus B came over to the States and were actively scrimming Cloud9 Main and Cloud9 Tempest, which they didn't win a single game against in scrims, from what I'm being told. And overall, it seems like the best prepared team, which obviously is Besiktas, it seems like they took it. And I feel like we talked about day one, INTZ just looked a little... I wouldn't say... Like, they were obviously off day one compared to their performance on the other days.
No, you can say that they were bad. I've watched that team all year, and I love that team, and I think they're a fantastic team, but they were bad. I've never seen them miss that much CS. Yeah. I've never seen them make basic mechanical mistakes that they did. They're way better players than what they showed on that first game.
It just seemed like the people who got actively good practice against the older regions were the ones that showed up and kind of, played on the high ground, and then obviously the one that was scrimming the European teams took the whole thing. So
yeah, it comes down to regional isolation. I think that Brazil and Turkey they have a lot of money in their scene. Turkey, obviously, they're landlocked. They're basically people make a joke that Besiktas are basically a bad, or not even just a bad, but they're just an EU challenger team, more or less. They are in that scrim culture. They're in the area. And so they always have, and this is a big thing. It's always based on competition and having to look up rather than looking down. In Brazil, once you're in INTZ, okay, maybe you scrim Pain. Maybe you scrim I forget, Cade. But who else? Like at that point, sure, there are going to be other teams, but what do you learn from? It's not so much what teams are good, but who do you learn from? Who do you use to get better? And then same thing happens in Oceania, where you're like, okay, so we're scrimming, Direwolves is a really good team. Direwolves is a really good team. But at some point you realize that you either know the most in your region or there's not much to learn. And so when you leave, for instance, when you leave the region and you have the mindset that every player on your team is mechanically the best in your region and you have nothing to really compare it to, you bring it onto IWCI and you're like, wow, they're losing lane. We didn't plan for that. We actually had an idea that we had the strong laners. And so when it comes to 2v1s, you're like, oh, wow, they outplayed us in the 2v1s. We didn't think about the aspect of, in terms of certain compositions. We've had the compositions. We had those planned. But then it would feel like there was not a lot of confidence in terms of tower diving or something, and maybe we didn't drill it in as much. But it's that confidence, that lack of confidence wasn't there when we were in our own region. And so you ask yourself, well, why wasn't it there? What do they have to learn? And so, of course, everybody has something to learn. That's the whole point of, prepping for a team. But it's really easy to miss learning points when you kind of think that they have it down, right? In some areas. And I think that's the big issue. Or even when you have, definitely one issue is that I knew that there were some points of communication, when I'm speaking about the Chiefs, or I'm just speaking about it just in general, where that there's an issue that you need to resolve in terms of communication, in terms of map movement, but then you ask yourself, how do you resolve that? Because when you're scrimming certain teams, there's no way to really figure out, well, we weren't pressured in that situation, so how are we going to act like we're pressured? How are we going to play to our prime? Play up to our prime if no one's really punishing us. So we can't make trades. Literally the trades are always in our favor. So I don't know. That's one issue. And then of course you have the Turkish teams that just go they know what they were doing wrong, and they have scrim partners to do that. Yeah.
All right, so what
Yeah.
I'm hearing is that Turkey did well because they have people to learn from.
Mhm.
Yes.
So, I mean, that to me just says that the Turkish region is going to improve faster than the other regions. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
That's yeah, that's true. I think that's what I think it is. And also, honestly, another thing that also comes to play, like into like play, even though that it's not ultimately, maybe it's ultimately the death blow to INTZ, but not so much to every other team. In that, like the tournament took place in Turkey, and the finals game was in a Turkish stadium. Like that's obviously that's an excuse in that sense. And INTZ, everyone will make the same excuse. Everyone will like be, oh well, the better team won. For sure, they didn't get enough practice time. Sure, they came into the tournament in like Turkish, so that's obviously going to work against them. That's a minor thing, but of course I'm talking about the major thing of the region as a whole as well. There's a lot of
A lot of question. Sure.
Mm.
Solid analysis, right
Yeah.
there.
I find
That's
it really
Plaza. You
interesting.
can follow him on Twitter. Here you go. Okay.
I find it really interesting though that Japan, the Destination Focus Bee came to the States and actively tried to boot camp, and like I'm sure they learned some things out of it, but I was not expecting them to be that. Like I was not expecting when I was hearing scrim results with the two C9 teams, even the Challenger one, like for them to be struggling that hard.
You know, another thing that makes me salty is,
Well,
and
why
that's-
not? I mean, they don't have. It's not like they don't have a server, so they can't attract a lot of like local talent. So,
Mhm.
Oh,
so
yeah.
if they're, I mean, they could argue this. So I mean, at this moment, you just have the players who are interested in it enough to play on 200 ping, and those aren't necessarily going to be the best. So,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a situation that Japan is in right now.
But at least they
More or
have
less.
something going. Like they will get a server soon. They have
Mhm.
sponsors for their teams, and at the same time, they already have a gaming house. Like that's like for those teams, they're
At least
once
there's
once the
interest.
ball gets rolling.
It's like the infrastructure is there before the actual game. And they also have the benefit of like Turkey being closer to some of these bigger regions. So I mean, in a situation like they almost have like this tier of people they can scrim with. They can start with Southeast Asia. As they get better, they can move into scrimming like the Taiwanese teams.
Mhm.
Go and just progress from there. Okay. Anyway, we've mapped out Japan's plan to become the strongest region now. No. Okay. So, Chiefs. We talked a lot about Brazil,
Mhm.
and you hinted a little bit on some Chiefs things. So, Razzleplasm. It
Hi.
sounds like is very open about the fact that he was helping the Chiefs during the wild card tournament.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of insight into a little bit of more detail into what the Chiefs were thinking, like what their thoughts on how they were going to do, and
Mhm.
whether they met expectations or not?
Um. Of course, I guess the easiest answer is that the expectations were not met. Everybody has the goal of getting to Worlds. Of course, once you get to Worlds, you know what you're gonna face. And once you get to like the international tournament, you know what you're gonna face, and like you pretty much just you play like okay, but like that's the goal. And everybody wants to get to that point. But then when you realize, and so um, everyone scrimmed hard in Oceania. Like once, like we played through, of course, the LPL split. We did extremely well, undefeated except for that. Actually, we lost one game to Fornut. The random. That was an unfortunate game. You get to playoffs. We sweep. So literally, the only game we've lost was to Fortnite. And so generally that's pretty amazing. Like that's a great feat to have. Unfortunately, what that means is that literally means that there's no competition in the region. Like I think Direwolves is a great example of like upcoming competition in the sense that I think that their players are great, their coaching staff is amazing. I think that team will be the catalyst for actual competition in that region, along with the Chiefs being like course being on top. And so when we were working with the team, a lot of the things that we worked on was communication, just general communication coming from the top lane, timing, everything, like just kind of getting everybody on the same page. And one issue that, of course, that we were always working on is adapting to the meta was a big thing because we were big on laning phase. We were big on early game to mid game snowball. Kind of, it sounds familiar to to a lot of these lesser known regions slash LSPL. But once that changed, of course, you had to move towards a late game like look, and so we were pretty. We were actually really like confident in certain compositions. One specifically was like an Anivia comp, and we were like, I felt like we always had answers in terms of pick and bans. But the biggest issue that I felt like the Chiefs had was honestly it comes down to the region not having money in the scene. And that you look at Japan, there's already an infrastructure. You look at Turkey, there's like structure is there. They're already nearby. They're landlocked. They're like they get money too. Like, and you look at Brazil, and like obviously that's another great example of that. They even import Korean players. Like I wouldn't say it's not en masse like China, but they if it's one thing they lack, it's not money. And so you look at Oceania, and I don't think there's no, there isn't a single team with a gaming house. And on top of that, if you watch OPL, you realize that internet in that region's extremely shitty.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's
Oh yeah.
bad.
True.
So you have bad internet, no LAN experience for these teams, and there's no like, I guess competitive like there's no competitive history in that region. So like that's just how it is. And so what you have is like the region is run purely on player motivation and goals. And so like sure everybody has that. Like every team is gonna have those goals. And so we worked on it and we just like I did as much probably there's 100% there's a lot more that should have been done. There are a few regrets in that case. But then you get to the wild card and it was surprising. People didn't expect like I guess how unprepared we were for that competition.
Okay.
But at least we had more time than in Brazil. I'll put that. That's nice.
I think everybody did.
So is the consensus that not so do we think that the biggest thing for some of these teams to improve in the wildcard regions is infrastructural change? So you need to have like a C9 come in and make sure everyone's serious, or is it going to be having better competition across the board? Like, do you need someone to come in and say, I am the change I want to see in this region? Or do we need everyone to just like get more serious at once? Like obviously, ideally, you want like what will cause the competition to improve? Better access to scrim partners in other regions? One team suddenly just being very very serious? Like what is the most important thing here for these regions?
I'd say it's not one team coming in and being super serious because already like this entire split, INTZ and Cade were predominantly the two best teams. Like there's just it wasn't really close. They were both incredibly serious with international aspirations. They both wanted to go to MSI. And in terms of, I guess, they need to and this is just my opinion, so you can totally disagree with me, but I just believe that overall you learn more from mistakes than you do from success. So if someone is punishing you for your mistakes and pointing them out, you have to actively problem solve to overcome them. Like you see teams, like I can point out examples of other teams in other regions that did that. Like to be honest, LGD is coming to mind first in terms of like pinpointing a weakness and then trying to come up with a solution. And obviously that's a lot different, but I think if you're forced to really look at your team and isolate the problem areas and then leverage your strengths to become a better team, I think that requires being punished for your mistakes or someone pointing out your weaknesses as a team first. And if you're just dominating your region, that won't happen. And
these
that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Feel free to disagree with it, but that's just what I believe.
And these like punishing like teams and people for their mistakes, it's not only like limited to in game either. It's limited to out of game kind of things. Like if one team gets a gaming house, if one team starts to like, I guess, take their scrims a lot more seriously, or generally they like either they pay their players more, or they like if there's a more serious nature to that team, then that pressures other teams to follow along, where they will drop by. Like they get punished in a more social setting. It seems like.
So obviously, what we really need is a mid-season invitational with a wild card tournament and a mid-season invitational with the best team from every region that's absolutely dominant, right? And then we need to have another mid-season invitational with the second best team from every region and see if these teams adapt more because they've gotten shit on so much by the dominant teams. Okay.
I just want more international competition. That's all I want.
In general, we've
Same.
moved on to we've covered INTZ and Chiefs.
Mhm.
Besiktas, which you guys probably are useless to me because neither of you care about Turkey. But tell me, what are just like really quick? Give me everyone who wants to give me the strongest point of Besiktas and the weakest point, and if you think they can win any games at MSI.
Okay, fine. The team is a lot more structured. I think their AD carry is really. He's been around in the scene in EU for a long time. They have. When I say that they have strong laners or just strong players, like it is in a more objective manner. Like you talked about, like for instance, if you talk about Chiefs or INTZ, you're like, okay, they're great in the region. You put them up in an actual international setting, you're like, okay, Besiktas, they have players who stand out a little more. And at the same time, they're a lot more crisp in terms of team fighting. But
Yeah.
I feel like what you see from them is not special in that sense, because you already see that coming out of EU challenger teams or EU teams in general. And it's like, it's not even it's not a bad thing to say that, because when you say EU challenger team, what does that mean? That's a lot more structure coming out of that area than like other regions, like as in like wildcard regions. So that's my take on that.
So are they going to win any games?
No,
Okay.
no.
All right.
If you remember,
Even against the AHQ? Not at all.
No.
Okay.
now they beat Yowie. Yeah.
This is the logic we're talking about. It's like if the
I don't
team
wanna-
beats the best team, then they've already obviously learned something, right? So like in the Taiwanese, Macau, Hong Kong region, we actually had a situation where there was this team that was dominating for this really long time. And we had AHQ who wasn't doing that well, and they actually managed to grow and develop and fix things and beat this dominant team. So we had like this experiment that happened. So let's see how AHQ does. Obviously, it would be nice if this happened in a major region, like maybe LGD could do that. But hey,
Try.
Back in
We'll
season three.
We'll get to them later.
Back in season 3, the Daniel Yordanov from SK did an interview with Reckless, and Reckless decided to mention the current Besiktas AD carry, and like praised him pretty highly. And he decided not really to commit to LoL at the time because he was
does
really
guy have
young.
a name, or are we just calling him the Besiktas carry?
Nardius.
Nardius, yes.
His name's Nardius.
And his name's come up a lot recently, actually. Like, a lot of people have been scouting this guy out because he's actually, like, praised by a lot of the EU players to be fairly good. So, yeah, I definitely think if anybody's their strong
Is
point,
he
that's
praised by a lot of EU players in the same way UCI is praised by a lot of EU players because they've seen him play like one game where he overperformed, or is he
No.
consistent?
No, he's praised to be consistent and a solid like up and comer. So
Okay.
Kelsey with the secret Chinese jab.
I know.
It's
Like,
It's coming.
here's the nice.
I just want to like I'm not slamming players of any kind. I just know that a lot of times like they're really busy practicing, so they'll have a smaller sample size for judging like players that they don't necessarily play all the time. So
Yeah.
like do these EU players actually play Nardius a lot or?
I'm pretty sure they do. I think he plays some EUS solo queue. I'd have to
I
look,
hope we're not-
but
Hope we're not judging solo queue. I don't know.
no. But like,
Yeah.
obviously,
Just saying. Obviously, there's a level of
I think-
mechanical competency, and when we're talking about wild card players, a lot of the times mechanical competency is
Yeah.
an issue. So,
Mm.
I mean, I think it's a really good test of him at MSI. But you have to remember your two major regions are bringing 280 carry, or your two like major Western regions that he would be, considered on a little bit on par with. They're not bringing the best of 80 carries either. Wild Turtle's not, not I wouldn't maybe top 3 in the region, but very very close, if so. And Steelback is a solid player, but he's definitely not a like
I would
top
say
tier.
both of these are janitorial type
Yes.
of carries. Yes.
So it will be interesting to see how Nardius does in comparison to those two, because those would technically be his peers that he should be able to hold down if he's being praised by premier 80 carries in Europe. So, yeah.
All right. Do you think they'll win a game?
I don't think so. No, just because I feel like this whole entire tournament is going to be bringing extremely strong mid laners, and I feel like they're just going to get crushed from that position. Forbidden, Bjergsen, Pong, and then more than likely Faker. So it's definitely going to be difficult at most to try to pick up a game. So
Okay. Oh. We'll let that go until later. Emily, other thoughts on Besiktas? One strength, one weakness, how they'll do?
Nardius was good. I actually really liked their support player, Dumbledoge or Dumbledoge, however you pronounce that. I thought he was very good. I think their decision making in team fights was typically very good, and I honestly don't see them winning a game, and the reason is because the things that they are good at, like team fighting, they're going to be going up against teams that will team fight better, not make the same mistakes in terms of shot calling and team fight decisions. And when I talk about team fight decisions, I'm talking about like when to go in, who do you focus, like that kind of stuff. Like how does Shyvana flank, et cetera, et cetera. I think that they'll be going up against teams that won't make the same mistakes that INTZ did make. And I still maintain that INTZ's objective control and their minion control was actually better than Besiktas. So I think that they'll be going up against teams that are equal or better in team fighting and will have like vastly superior objective control. So I think that no, they will not take.
So it sounds to me a little bit like you're saying that if INTZ went, they would win a game, maybe here or there. What?
I don't know if they would actually. It would depend. I still love INTZ, and I think they have the potential to become a really, really, really strong team. But I think that this tournament pointed out a lot of mistakes that they need to work on, and I think that's a good thing in the end. So that's all I'll say. I still
Keeping you in check. Just keeping you in check there, Emily, a little
because
bit.
the players are all really great, and they're all really, really hardworking, and I hope they can take this and really, really turn it into a good.
Like, I will go farther than you because I've actually, from what I've seen, the typical Brazilian aggression is actually like a thing that needs to start trending, maybe, because INTZ is a team that they have their own style. Like, not only do they have their own style, but they are confident in that style. And if you give them time to like prep for their teams, etc., like blah blah blah, excuses, excuses. But if you actually put them in a professional setting that is not like neck deep in like uh I wouldn't say like mm, I'm gonna walk away from that because I was
Alright.
about to say neck deep. I'm just gonna go for it anyways because like we all know hometown advantage is a big thing. I'm just gonna go out with it anyways, even if people disagree with it. That
Uh,
like if you're going into a final setting and you're just like you just hear jeers from the crowd, like that's a major mental factor.
Oh,
That is.
they said. I mean, like I
Mhm.
can go out and say Revolta did say that it affected them.
Yeah. And so you're never gonna find a measurement of how much it's affected them and whether that was a difference. I don't think, like between Besiktas and INTZ, those teams, I would say
I swear we need to call them Besiktas. Like, let's not
Besiktas.
call. Yeah, you were
Okay.
calling them something else.
Okay, okay.
To me.
I call them
Not
something different every time. I
Okay.
call
All right. With that, though, let's finish the Brazil apologists section and
Oh.
We
move
have the
on to
biggest one in the call, so.
moving on to that. No, okay, I'm sure like INTZ did actually played a lot of really good games, so I was excited about that. So let's go on to the roster news.
Okay.
That is North America.
Yeah.
Woo! Because we don't care about other rosters. The big one, right? High steps down. He benches himself very honorably with his hand problem and everything else. Um, how this apparently happened on a stream.
Yeah.
There was a very exciting stream leak by the Stream Honeys that everyone was talking about for a while.
It was
Let's
honestly so disappointing. Out of all places that could have been leaked, that's where it got leaked. And yeah, like obviously you're not gonna question. Like I'm assuming that I'm assuming this girl is really good friends with Charlie, and you're not gonna ask, "Are you streaming?" before you say something like that. She had 16 viewers, and then one of them decided to screen cap her stream and put it on Reddit. So, like. It's really unfortunate how this leaked because it's something we knew coming, but it kind of felt like he didn't like the initial leak didn't feel like he got sent away initially like he deserved. And I think a lot of people from all the articles like the people wrote like Ryan Tang and then the actual official C9 announcement and everything, I feel like those were very like I think that's the way I wanted the high send off to be was people praising him for what he has done for this scene in North America and being a really nice guy as well as a really like at his prime he was a very strong player and he's always been a very good shot caller and I felt like he properly did get sent off but it was unfortunate how it leaked and you know I wish that was not the case so yeah.
So, how do we feel about this sort of send off? Like, I mean, it feels like this kind of thing happens all the time.
Yeah.
And we did see a lot of the great articles. Like, I literally read it with every single front page thing was related to High. So, everyone on Twitter was talking about it, and just, I don't really think the send off had a huge impact on it. Like, I didn't even know the details of how it happened until someone just told me just now in this conversation. So,
Yeah.
I had some vague whisperings of it, but I think overall the reaction was extremely supportive of High.
Yep.
It was like all the people saying bench High were suddenly like supporters of High. So that was exciting, as usual. But how do we feel about High stepping down? Do we think it was a necessary change for C9? Was it a situation where it was something that had to come eventually, and it just like he saw the writing on the wall and decided to step down? How do we feel about that?
Well, they've been actively pursuing players for 6+ months, so it was kind of
Okay,
was
fine.
inevitable.
Uh,
Like Yasui and Incarnation had both been told they were getting a tryout for this position long before Richard leaked that he had signed a contract with Cloud9 Incarnation. I mean, so it was inevitable. It was one of those moments. I kind of felt like I've been really connected to High and Lemon since like Orbit days and like Nia and Turtle back then. But overall, I felt like it was a necessary move, and it's going to better Cloud9 off the back of it. So
okay, so
Yeah. And by the way, I don't think like roster leaks have like generally ever came out in a pretty decent way. Like the whole
if this
Saint,
were
like
a real sport, am I right? No. Okay, let's
yeah,
go.
I don't think the whole confirmed on Saint stream was like a major thing for quite a while. Like it's stream
yeah.
confirmations have always been a thing. So I don't know. It was natural, kind of expected. I don't know.
All right, so
I guess the only question I would have, because like you asked if it was inevitable, and Jacob just said that they had been trying out other mids, like, but from the perspective of like interviews and stuff, it just really seemed like he also kind of thought it was time too, which tells me that it was time, because I feel like if you do have a player who feels like they're in a position where they can't continue to contribute at the level that they have, then it is really best that they step down.
He said something in his announcement with Cloud9 to that sort, where his team didn't really believe in his calling anymore, and there's really not much you can do at that point. When you reach the point where your team doesn't believe in what you're doing,
Then
you kinda have to move
that's an
on.
issue. So I mean, then
Yeah.
it was definitely time, and you know, he gets to go out on like not like a super 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 amazing note, but like certainly not on a poor one. So
Yeah, that's true.
Hmm.
oh, how do we feel about the death of America's team?
That
It-
is, yeah.
They still could be America's team. They have a wonderful American 17-year-old boy living in the house right now who's trying out for the position.
There you go.
So-
Well, we have varying definitions of one wonderful. I'm sure he actually is wonderful. Let's see. Let's talk about then. I mean, I feel like the High needs to step down thing has been beaten like a dead horse. Like, oh, people say in interviews, TSM says in interviews, I feel we could win because we have a better champion pool. Oh, you mean High only plays Zed, right? Those kind of jokes went on and on forever. So it's almost like the High, like, but really, really, truly, do you think that C9 could have won another split with High?
No,
no,
Split
Hey,
it.
it's just getting-
I think so.
Just
It's getting-
LCS, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I would say so.
really?
It's possible. Like,
And they didn't
yeah.
even do that poorly in the finals, right? Like they didn't get completely smashed. Like Meteos had the amazing Sejuani ultimate or
Sejuani
whatever
game.
else. So
yeah.
I mean,
Media's played the way I've been wanting him to play for months because he seemed like I wouldn't say fallen off, but he definitely, like, you could tell something was wrong in team environment, and he shows up in this final as an absolute god, like, reminiscent of, like, Season 3, early Season 4, where he was just absolutely stomping everyone, and no one knew how this guy was so good at jungle. So,
I mean, it's not even an individual thing at that point. Once you get to that point of competition, it's down to like how the team meshes together. And I know like Balls have been maybe like at the most you can put Balls in that sense that maybe he hasn't been performing well as to the point in which he was before. But it was a team thing. Like I remember their tower dives. Like it's like Meteos and Balls for whatever reason. I feel like they've regressed in synergy. Like. They've just had some very awkward moments when it comes to tower diving and ganking for that lane. It's just been weird.
Yeah.
I don't know.
but
So
it's always been their, like, meta to, like, camp Balls, like, ever since that team started to go up high, or, like, high in rankings and start to progress to a high peak, they've always put Meteos top lane. But but that's a little bit harder now because High obviously struggles compared to the newer up and coming mid lane
and
competition.
Balls has been struggling too. Like that's the
Yeah.
other thing, and
A lot of
Sneaky has
people-
really been like the high note
Yeah.
lately. So
I don't know.
I don't
Balls-
even think that's necessarily a true reality of how they've been playing.
Balls has been criticized really heavily for not being good in this tank meta, but this tank meta is very different than last year's tank meta, where it was like Renekton, Shyvana, Trundle every game, and then like a Mundo, which he was fine in. He was perfectly okay last spring.
I disagree. So
Yeah, I disagree
Really?
with that.
yeah, he had a terrible time in the 2v1 on
Oh yeah,
teams.
no,
So-
of course, but
Mhm.
he was okay at Trundle and.
He did not like jungle follow at all. Like
Oh no.
he had a terrible time. Like C9 could not adapt to jungle follow. Of course, he's been okay on Rumble. Rumble is the champion he can play now. I mean, it's just Rumble's always going to be his champion, so that doesn't matter. But I mean, Balls has been a question mark. High is always a kind of a will he or won't he give up 7 kills this game, and Sneaky has been performing like really solidly. So
Sneaky is definitely the best in his position in NA. That I don't think you can argue. It's very hard if you want to, but Sneaky is definitely a top of the pack in AD carries in America. So.
okay, so the question really is, regardless of how you feel about whether or not they can win another LCS split, do you think that the next question is going to be, do you think that a new mid laner would? Okay, so I guess let's talk about the mid laners that they're supposedly trying out. High
Yeah.
even said on his AMA that it's Yusui and Incarnation. It's pretty, like, people were talking about Yusui and Incarnation. These are the picks that they're looking at. First of all, let's look at that a little bit. We'll come back to the Cloud9 winning LCS thing later. Yusui and Incarnation. Which one do we think is the best option here?
I think they're very different style from previously watching them. I think Incarnation is a very solo. Like he doesn't really need the camp as much as Yusui does, where Yusui has always been
And
very.
this is based on what is this based on?
Yeah,
is this
what
based
is-
on solo queue games? Is this
No.
based on
He was playing competitively in third party tournaments for a bit under an alias last year, beginning of last year, and the end of 2013 before he got banned.
Okay, so at the beginning of
Yeah,
last year, end
beginning
of
of-
2013, it's been a really long
it's
time
fine,
since then.
But he's still mechanically extremely gifted from, and a lot of your mid laners in EU will tell you that. So
Based on solo queue games.
I'm gonna come out and say it. I think Yusui is completely overhyped. Absolutely overhyped. People who watch his play in third-party tournaments, he has bad games. Like he's not like maybe has like like a massive future ahead of him, maybe, but he's not he's not what people put him out to be. He's not a good he's not the best player. He's not even a good player LCS standard. I don't think he's better than High. That's what it comes down to. But I think Incarnation is far better. I obviously Incarnation doesn't have competitive experience to the level of High, but does Yusui? No, he doesn't.
So you would go Incarnation. Jacob, you didn't really give me a Yusui or Incarnation.
I would go Incarnation, but since regardless, and this is my theory, it's something I've heard but not actually confirmed. The loser of this tryout gets the Cloud9 Tempest spot. The winner gets the main spot. The loser gets the C9T spot. So either way, they're going to be in the Cloud9 organization, and they will be available to put in. So I think Incarnation is obviously the initial choice if tryouts go properly. However, I think Yusui, I don't know. I feel like Yusui, and from my personal conversations with him, he seems like he wants it a lot more. So does he play at his peak, which is very, very good when he's shown it, to make this team? And if he does, I think he'll give Incarnation a decent run for his money. So I would pick Incarnation blindly, but I think Yasui is not someone that you should underestimate before you see really his determination to get this position.
So it sounds like you don't disagree. You disagree with Razzlepazm and the overhype, but you're basing this off Yusui's determination, right?
Well, that and some of his competitive experience. Even with LoL Pro, he was doing decently in tournaments. So
But is doing decently in tournaments LCS level?
yes,
Okay.
Yes.
he was playing against Slushy and Keen and was doing fine. So
Fine.
like
You're using these very broad terms with you, Jacob.
okay,
I need
so
some help here.
he was holding his own well enough to be an LCS mid laner,
Okay.
and he was
It's
even
very important to to have a discussion on what that means in the sense
Yes.
that you have like Keen for instance or Slushy for a good example. They were players that had a large future ahead of them. That's certainly the case, and they get put into the LCS and they do really well later on. That's also true, but
yes.
Yusui has been a case in which he hasn't proven himself in the challenger scene. He hasn't. He gets propped up. Maybe like a while back he did really well. But you have Keen, who's done extremely well in Oceania. He comes over here and actually does it like he's been proven to be a superstar. And then you see Slushy, and Slushy has the same kind of, I guess, showing in that sense, not to the showing of Keen, but he shows for instance there was an issue in which God damn it, I remember when Dignitas was picking out mid laners because they were replacing Skara, and they got
Golden Glue.
Golden Glue. And at that time I remember there was a screenshot and there was a discussion of people who were like, why aren't they picking up Slushy? Because Slushy was performing really well in the challenger scene, and was Yusui's name in that time, like around at that time. Yeah, he was good for a challenger scene, like in the challenger level.
But he wasn't in NACS, so people really were shooting blind in the dark there.
Let's define Yusui as a player, okay?
Mhm.
Let's just get to this, okay? We're not gonna cut any corners. Well, we're gonna cut some corners because I don't want to talk about this all night. But
Yeah.
let's define like what type of a mid laner is he? Is he gonna be a part of the pay, will win lane, will carry off of getting snowballed in lane type mid laner? Is he a mid laner who plays a supportive style, stands back, lets other people carry, but always like performs solidly in lane? Is he going to be a roamer who goes and supports other lanes? Does he help his jungler on invades? Like what kind of play do we see out of this guy?
He's a carry mid laner.
So I described various ways to carry, but what?
He is initially a ribbon mid main, which is where he got famous for on his Timp name killer account, and that is in solo queue, and that is his strongest champion. But at the same time, he is very good at assassins. He is trying to learn things like Corki and Kog'Maw and even a little bit of Lulu, but his main goal is or his main play style is aggressive and beating you in lane. And
okay. So he's like a lane winning mid laner.
He's like a Bjergsen.
Okay.
But not as good.
That actually explains a lot. Okay.
Similar
so we're comparing his playstyle to Bjergsen's playstyle.
Yes.
So gets a lot of advantages, keeps it in lane. do we think, does he rely on a jungle? And you said you think he relies on jungle camp earlier a little bit more than Incarnation?
He did in his time with LoL Pro. He has a bit with he has a bit of that with Hard right now. So.
Okay. Do you agree with Braille's assessment of Yusui as a player, Raz?
I guess it just comes down to like if you want to compare him to Bjergsen or something, you're literally comparing
obviously
a player
we're
who's been
taking
tested. It's a playstyle,
the caveat, but we're just
Yeah.
talking about the playstyle essentially.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. So, do we think this is the kind of playstyle that would do well in C9?
I think it can. I don't know at face value if it will at first, but I think it can with a little bit of adaptation. I think Meteos can play to that playstyle with a mid laner. I think he's very capable of doing so.
Well, like what are we basing this on here?
Meteos is an extremely solid jungler that's always been able to adapt.
So we're saying that Meteos is capable of camping the mid lane if necessary. Wasn't one of the big contentions in like the first when Cloud9 was formed was that Meteos was annoyed that High wanted so many ganks? Like it doesn't
Yeah,
seem
but obviously, like
Meteos
Yasui
wants
is
to
not
be a
that
lane
bad.
camping jungler. All right, so I don't know. Well, let's move on. I
It's
don't even
very
know
blind.
about
It's a
anymore.
very shot
All
in the
I
dark.
wanted to do was to make sure that we understood what type of player Yusui is. And is Incarnation a very similar type of player? Is he like a lane-winning mid laner? would you
Yes,
say?
but I don't think he will need as much jungle camp to be so.
I don't know
Okay.
anything about. I actually have
Yeah, I
not
have
seen.
no idea. I'm just
Yeah.
I have
asking.
not seen
Speculate.
Incarnation play, so I don't even. That's why I don't even want to have this discussion.
Exactly.
Because
But the point is
Yeah.
that we absolutely don't really even know what type of mid laners these are. There are
Hmm.
so many other mid laners. If we're talking about Cloud9 going 6 months, like you said, 6 months, right, Braille?
Yeah.
6 months looking for possible replacements for High. And we're with Yusui and Incarnation here, and we don't know anything about these players. Like, we just had this huge debut of so many mid laners in EU LCS who showed they have a lot of knowledge, a lot of obviously we're looking for more of these like uprooting stars in the West, right? This is the same approach they're taking, but there's a lot of proven talent that was looking for a team 6 months ago that has shot calling experience. Do we know if Incarnation and Yusui have any shot calling experience? This is the one thing that we're not talking about. Like, where is the shot calling, the team play that made Cloud9 so good? Where is this going to come from now? Is the big question. That's my thing.
I've been told and I think there was an interview on this. They're kind of shifting that over to Meteos more. Yasui has previously shot called in other teams, not a lot. Incarnation is a solo Q star, so whether he can adapt and shot call at all, who knows? So
All right. So, do we feel like with either of these players, Cloud9 has a better or worse chance of winning LCS summer than with High?
I think that it might be worse. It's really, really difficult to tell because High was a pretty massive presence on the team in terms of warding. I think that was his major feature on that team. He warded so damn much for that team. And so now what are you going to do if you have a different style in that sense? You have to actually restructure the entire idea, or at least the like presence and roles of certain players. Maybe Incarnation comes into the team, and maybe Yusui comes into the team, and they're like, okay, you just have to ward just as much. That's maybe just a thing that happens. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I think what it comes down to, it's a massive gambit as to where they want to see their skill cap be. And will that lead them into, like, will that be too big of a gambit? Will they actually be able to go to Worlds next split? I don't know. I'm a doubter. I'm a pretty big doubter with coming, like, from just seeing the LPL and seeing how teams have done kind of poorly initially when they've had roster changes. But you have so much time for playoffs, and maybe that's just enough time that they need.
All right. So you're saying worse, right?
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Braille? How do you think they have a better chance of winning LCS this summer?
I really have no idea. It really
I don't
comes
care.
down to
We're just throwing. Like, we've already established we don't know anything about these players. That they just might be better mechanically, and they're probably worse at shot calling. So let's just say-
if they get Incarnation and this guy is able to hold his own against Bjergsen / beat Bjergsen, yes, they will be better. If
Okay.
not, no.
all right.
So,
Mhm.
See, because all I care about is whether or not they're going to still win LCS. Because do we think that they have a better chance of playing Sing better at an international competition with these rosters? Because if we don't, then all that matters is LCS.
I think we're gonna have to stick with any kind of LCS prediction for now because we really have no clue. Once we see how they do in LCS, I
I'm
think
a
it's a
fan
little
of
bit more we can judge.
making pulling predictions out of my ass. Okay, like this is where we're going.
Mm.
Okay. Since you guys are not having fun with this, let's move on to LCK. We've talked Cloud9 to death. That was kind of painful, probably because I'm terrible at hosting. LCK! SK Telecom versus CJ Entus. The big hype behind this match was that both of these teams were undefeated on the new patch going in. Correct. CJ historically played really good team fights, but were looking better overall in general coming into this. SK Telecom had finally gotten their shit together. We were playing Faker. Faker has seemed to have like a bunch of different champions who could play on this patch. Very good team fighting across the board. CJ wins the first 2 games. SK Telecom comes back and reverse sweeps. What went wrong with CJ in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th game? Or rather, what went well with SKT?
If I recall correctly, they stopped banning Lulu, which was bad news bears game 4. CJ had banned it out game 1 and game 2, I believe. They didn't ban it game 4. He comes in, plays Lulu, very well supportive style.
Game 3 as well, I think, if I recall, because they had. I remember.
Yeah, he
game
did.
three's
Played 2 Lulus and a LeBlanc.
Mhm.
And yeah, they, for whatever reason, I guess they felt like they should ban something else. They didn't ban Lulu. They gave Lulu to Faker. He did well on it.
Didn't SK Telecom ban Lulu in the first game? If I remember correctly, because they banned it.
But that was Easy Hoon was the first game.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like, they banned it against, because I know CJ has a good Lulu comp, so.
And then last game looked like Tilt City, and Faker came out and was like 15-1 on LeBlanc. So
Okay.
that's pretty self-explanatory. He came out and crushed absolutely everybody. So
Emily, what did you think about Tom specifically?
I thought Tom was. That's actually what I was gonna bring up. Like,
Yeah.
like what was the difference? Oh, hey, game 3's Bengi played. And like,
Yeah.
and Bengi has been someone, and this is probably why Raz is asking me about this, because Bengi has been someone that I have never been kind to. I don't think once I've ever been kind to Bengi.
Okay, we're gonna get to TBQ. Let's go. I put them on the same
I will
tab.
talk about TBQ too. Don't worry.
This is the meta for the real jungle god.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate this meta so much. Okay, let's go.
Like, for me, that was the difference. Like, what happened after the past 2 games? Tom didn't play, and suddenly Bengi, our hero on the new patch, steps in.
The god Bengi.
Yeah,
it's worth noting
I
he
think,
played Rek'Sai all 3 games as well.
I think the thing with Tom, it's weird. He looked. There are a lot of things I praised him in the regular season for previously when you know they were really starting to play with him, and it was becoming obvious that they wanted some sort of backup plan for Bengi. Tom, what I initially like praised him for was actually his team fighting. Like, I thought he did a really good job of initiating and stuff like that, and that was completely absent in the first 2 games. Like, he looked, there's like one engage I'm thinking of with Gragas, I think, in the top lane, that he just looked so off. And by off, I mean not like he was like tilting or something. He just is not synchronized with the rest of the team to perform these like coordinated team fights, or even just like 2 to 3 man skirmishes. And that's something that SKT has kind of like historically, as a team, they've been able to pull off those maneuvers well. And, you know, Bengi steps in, and suddenly the team, it's hard to describe. I'm not going to say they calmed down, but like he suddenly those you know, like simple like turret dives, or you know, just like really simple 2 to 3 man ganks, stuff like that, suddenly it looks so much more coordinated, and you can chalk it up to pressure, you can chalk it up to, I mean, he obviously just hasn't been playing with the team as long as Bengi has. Bengi's been around for forever. And Bengi is one of those junglers who is incredibly buffed on the new patch. So, I mean, he's comfortable in the spotlight. He's comfortable, like in the Cinder Hulk meta because he's never been a super flashy player. He's always been someone who just steps in and is serviceable and snowballs his lanes and knows when to do what. And I've been really harsh to him, but apparently today is the day that I put away all of my past feelings and say, Bengi, you were the difference maker in this.
You're not the only one. Please.
What they actually didn't tell us was that Bengi was in the hospital. Okay, right?
And he
lost the first 2 games. He ripped out the IV because SK Telecom needs me, and Ruts is dead. Okay,
But yeah, actually, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the difference maker was Bengi.
Well, it was Bengi. Like
Okay.
a lot of people forget, but that man had so much. He has so much experience. He is an All-Stars winner, Worlds winner, LCK. It goes on. Like he's played with that team for so long. He's a veteran like presence. And that's it. And you know what that brings when you have so much experience and I guess knowledge just from it, confidence in just efficient movements. And I've always wondered why LCK teams don't have challenger teams, just to like breed new talent. Because I think Tom, everybody will agree that Tom has a lot like his skill ceiling is higher than Bengi, but I don't think he has the experience, and I don't think he has maybe even just like the competitive jungle knowledge that Bengi has, and just having him play. That's all you need to do. Put him on a challenger team. Just have him play with a team competitively and comfortably in the meantime. And maybe that will come, like, maybe that'll level itself up to the point in which it's just like a natural progression in which you're like, oh, okay. I think Tom is better right now for the team. We're going to initiate. And it really won't matter what buzz as long as it's all 3 of them are in the right order.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
Azure, I think you were freaking out or something. I thought it was just on my end, but apparently not. You were kind of buffering on your connection a bit. So I'm going to assume you said something brilliant and awesome, and we're going to move on to the next question. I actually noticed at Up Tom that he got caught out in the early game a lot, and we brought up some teamfight sync issues, but overall, how do we feel about like Tom's play in the early game?
He played Nunu and Gragas, so I guess Gragas is a bit more aggressive than Nunu. Nunu is.
I was talking about him getting caught out. Like, getting caught out
yeah.
has nothing to do with aggression or not. And actually, Ambition played a very nice, aggressive jungle Gragas, I think. So,
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
And actually had some nice snowballs occasionally.
I mean, Tom is still relatively new. They brought him in halfway through the split, and he really didn't have much to say before that. I feel like it's kind of what Raz was saying. I feel like it's something SKT is trying to do in the long run, and like raising him to be like a good jungler. So,
All right.
giving him competitive experience against people that have played this game for a bit is definitely worth. But he definitely has lessons to learn and grow.
So let's talk about SK Telecom's the kind of compositions in the games they won. Personally, I turned on I was watching game 1 and game 2 live, and then they picked their composition in game 3. They picked the Maokai, Lulu, Sivir comp, and I was like, okay, they have no late game damage. This game's over. I'm turning this off.
Mm-hmm.
I wake up in the morning and SK Telecom had reverse sweeped. So let's talk a little. And then I watched in the next game they played Maokai Lucian, which is a little bit better. Okay. And then
Yeah.
the third game they had the LeBlanc, which is still like really early game heavy. Like you play LeBlanc when you want to get solo kills
Hello, Blanc Ballista. Yeah.
and snowball the game. And then Callista has like Callista has better late game. But like the big thing about the Callista is the level 2's power spike rate. So.
God damn it. Yeah. And
Let's
actually,
talk about how SK Telecom played these compositions and what allowed them to be successful when we see most of these games being won in like late game team fighting, as we discussed earlier.
one thing that I really was a standout for me was their focus on Lucian. I think that was in, I forget which game it was actually. I think it was in game 4, where Bang actually went BT first.
Yeah, it was game 4.
Yeah, BT first. Avarice played into Static Shiv with a turret kind of like focus, and he played phenomenally actually because they played a Lulu composition around him, and he was actually even though we credit a lot of it to Benki's confidence throughout the game, Bang really stepped up. He was a player that really showed, and maybe honestly the composition was just around him to be honest, but he played like up to like his early game, and later on he actually performed a lot better. And maybe it's just because he performs better under pressure. I'm not sure.
They went Lichbane, Lulu, and Triforce Lucian too, which pushes really fast. So yeah, that was, I don't know. He did step up pretty phenomenally. I was not expecting him to do so, but I was impressed. So I'm glad that SKT won because I want to see them in MSI. But you know,
How do we feel about Bang in the context of some of the 80 carries we mentioned earlier? Is he? Typically he's a janitor, SK 80 carry, right? But
Yeah.
Yeah.
how do we rate him with like the other 80 carries we have? We're not gonna get to the one from China yet.
Mhm.
But the Steelback, the Wild Turtle, the Narcissus.
he should be better, but I'm not sure because we haven't seen Bang internationally versus Western teams yet.
He kind of reminds me of Wild Turtle, to be honest. He's a janitor as AD carry, but sometimes he kind of positions too far forward in earlier games specifically. He's a janitor AD carry who sometimes forgets that he's a janitor AD carry. He kind of goes a little bit too far.
It will be interesting. He should theoretically be better than Steelback and Wild Turtle, but he shouldn't be as good as Deft. No. So,
Do we think he's going to carry some games against some of these Western teams, or if he matches up well?
I think he I don't know. I think the one matchup I'm looking forward to is if they make MSI, assuming they beat GE, which they should. I'm looking forward to the EDG versus SKT matchup just because the mid laners are both very strong, and it's gonna come down to bot lane. I think Def should win, but you know,
So
I think it will be one of the more games where we can gauge Bang and really what is he in comparison to other people, because obviously I would say Deft is the best AD carry in the world at the current moment. So.
do we think that SK Telecom is going to get away with some of these early to mid game power spike compositions against a team like GE Tigers?
I think GE is actually a team that's how to put this? Like it is really interesting the team compositions they won with, because if you think about the buffs that Bengi would have received, you think of champions like Nunu or whatever, but then all he did was play Rek'Sai. But I think in terms of GE Tigers as a team, pretty much the latter. Like so, after they secured the number one spot, they kind of, and like this is something that like I was only used to seeing in China, but like, and I'm not going to say they completely sandbagged, but they definitely used the time you saw them pulling out these kind of different looks. You saw them, I forget who it was against. I'm totally blanking. I'm sorry. I'm like kind of out of it today, but there was one game where they just literally used the time to really work on these weirdly aggressive early games because that's where they'd always lose. They'd
Right.
always lose in the early game. That's where they'd make mistakes and then they'd have to kind of come back in the mid to late game, and they somehow always found a way, even when teams like, and I'm talking mid-season Janair, not late season Janair, because late season Janair everyone thought was awful. But like mid-season Janair, I felt like they had a good strategy against GE in the early game, and GE somehow always managed to, get back into it. But they realized, obviously, after they secured the number 1 seed, that they could not get away with that. So they basically spent the latter, 3 weeks or so, 2 weeks after their match with KT, I'd say, they really started to work on, okay, we're going to get punished in the early game if we don't somehow deal with this. But I do think, based on what I saw from SK Telecom in these matches, I think that matchup, in my opinion, and I still can't believe I'm giving praise to Bengi, but if Bengi plays, I still think that they will have the advantage in the early game with those compositions.
I mean, Lee. His name is Lee, right?
His
So,
name is
obviously,
literally Lee.
that champion is people say his name is Lee because it's after Lee Sin. I don't know if this is true or not because his name is actually Lee.
His name is
Yeah.
Lee Hojin, and his name used to be Hojin, and then he changed it to Lee. So obviously, he's
So
a very.
I don't think it's
individual.
actually that he named himself after Lee Sin. Maybe he did. So, but I think someone said that, and I the point is that he plays a lot of Lee Sin. GE. Yeah, it's gonna be a question mark until they play, pretty much.
Yeah. It's
So.
weird because of the system of which the playoffs for Korea is shaping itself up to be, because they haven't played in such a long time.
Mhm.
And last time we saw them play, they were playing a composition which they were just trying, they're just testing, they were literally just testing shit out. So actually figuring out what form they'll be, what champs they'll play, I think honestly it's in their advantage because no one knows what they're playing right now. So they actually have for at least a couple, game 1, game 2, they should have a pick ban advantage in that sense. Maybe they'll just go back to playing the same old style.
And if they play the same old style, then meta should favor them, right? Because it's late game, team fighting, comebacks, right?
Exactly. So it should favor them. It should work out for them. I think SKT's gotten everything together, but GE Tigers is GE Tigers. I think they...
I think if there's one thing in their favor, GE has shown that if they have the time to prepare and study their opponent, that's when they do their best.
Yeah.
And they now have had not only time, but a lot of games to kind of study their opponents in SK Telecom on the new patch. So even though, in my opinion, I still think that SKT is going to come out on top, I do believe they're the better team. I think that GE, if they have any sort of advantage going into that match, Raz touched upon it. It's that they are a good team. They've been proven to be a very good team in terms of preparing for their opponent. And so they will come up with specific strategies to try to overcome this SK Telecom team.
Especially after Bengi's interview, when he said that when people asked him why did he play Rek'Sai, and he was like, well, I'm the most comfortable with this champion. He's literally told his enemy team what he's the most comfortable on, what he's been practicing the most. That's how can you not be prepared after that at some point? I don't know.
So
One thing
my question
worth
was just
mentioning.
Yeah, am I going?
Sorry.
go ahead. We'll just
One thing worth mentioning in that similar fashion, if GE win, or SKT, regardless of who wins this match, they have 3.5 days travel, or 5 days including travel, 3.5 days not including travel to get prepared for all of their opponents at MSI.
Yep.
okay.
Because the finals on the 2nd in Korea, and then is And then MSI starts on the 7th. So.
This is usually the position China is in. Bring it on.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. We just spent like the past 5 minutes talking about how the meta favors GE. GE looks really good, but GE has a lot of advantages in that they haven't prepared. But SK Telecom looks really good. So tell me, and is probably going to win. So tell me the thing that makes SK Telecom win. What makes SK? Okay, mid lane. Explain. Explain to me like I've never seen. Like, no, okay, don't go that bad. But like, just tell me. Tell me like how the mid lane matchup goes in favor of SK
I think
Telecom.
Faker has the blatant advantage, whereas bot lane, I think Prey and Gorilla are better than Bang and Wolf. I think Shell. And I'm hoping they play Bangi. I hope they don't risk this against GE. But I'm thinking if Faker
Things
gets
SK Telecom fans have never said. Okay, I hope they play Bangi.
I'm hoping that shall they play Bangi and Faker gets himself ahead on any kind of carry champion, that he'll just absolutely carry the game. I think it's a little bit dependent on that, because I think GE has a better advantage in most other spots. Maybe not jungle. I don't know. I think maybe the two junglers are about on par. But I think Faker's obviously the blatant outclass. So
Also, do you think it's mechanical? Do you think it's playstyle centric?
Champion pool.
Mm-hmm.
all of the above. Honestly, I just think he's a better mechanical player, yes. I think I don't know. I definitely think he's going to step up, because this is SKT being back at a peak of Korea again. And that is something I think that will favor him, and he can play well around, as compared to the rest of the map, where in lane they don't have as much of an advantage. So I think he's mechanically better than his opponent.
So you just said you think that bottom lane has an advantage. The rest of the map, GE has an advantage against it, but SK Telecom has Faker. So that's pretty much what you've told me just now.
Yes.
Okay, so Raz, thoughts?
I don't think mechanics matter all too much, especially when it comes to this meta's playstyle. I think it works for Kuro. I think, honestly, it works for Kuro in the sense that he's not a really strong laning champion, like a player. He isn't. I think he has a deeper champion pool.
It's Kuro free week.
Kuro free week.
He's not a very strong laning champion. But he has a really good. No, okay.
yeah, it's actually true. So, and it's also I feel like he's a player that's willing to play something a little cheesy to catch players off guard. Either be it random Scion mid. Like, actually, I hate this meta. like if it's like I think he's so comfortable playing what he wants, because the laning phase doesn't matter as much as it should. As it should, that's debatable, but as it used to.
Mm-hmm.
So you won't have the situation in which blind pick Faker goes LeBlanc into the shittiest composition, but it still works out because he solo kills like
Xerath first pick every time, baby. Let's do this.
I see. This is the advantage that GE has, because they just saw SK Telecom pick LeBlanc, and so they're going to come out with something in like blind pick. So if this game gets to blind pick, he's going to come out with like this Maokai 34 MR. Okay.
AP new mid.
With all MR runes. Okay. No. Let's. So it sounds like you think GE can win this. So
yeah.
Do you
even
favor
though
GE?
I think it's harder to call than the LGG versus like EDG matchup. I want to say that it's SKT. Just looking at history in general with the team's ability to adapt, looking at the amount of preparation that they get, and actually just looking at the meta and how it works for GE Tigers, it's hard to say they'll lose to SKT. That's, I don't know.
So you're saying GE will win?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
I like
Uh,
to go on my long useless.
Well, you didn't exactly give me an answer. You're like, it's
That's
hard
true.
to say SK Telecom will win. So, but are you going to say that?
I'm
Where are we
being
going
cop out answer. That's
here?
right.
All right, Emily, we're on you. Who's going to win and why?
I actually think that as like it's weird because we go down the list and it's like GE has No who's been a lot more reliable this entire season than Coma, in my opinion. In terms of pick and bans, like GE, they adapt specific strategies to their opponents. They have really good late game. They make really good late game decisions. But all of that being said, I don't know why. Like I want to pick
It's
SKT, and
I
I think
know,
it's
right?
because I think it's based on their experience. I think that they still are buffed on this patch. I think that even though they played these like early to mid game team compositions and they put Bengi on the rec side, I think that there's always that obvious answer of putting Bengi on, like another champion that he's done well on, like a Nunu. And I I honestly don't know what it is other than experience. And I'm not talking about like individual player experience, but just like overall team experience in that environment, in a pressure situation. Um, we saw, and like, I hate to bring this up, but like, we saw GE go to IEM and really not perform to the level that they are capable of and the level that they were expected to. And so, in terms of like just overall team experience, champions experience, finals experience, SK Telecom overwhelmingly takes that as a team. And I'm not saying that the players on GE aren't experienced, because obviously, like, Prey's been around for forever, and but like you have like honestly, I think it really comes down to the jungle matchup for me. And
Yeah.
and Lee has been, I remember him on Najin. I was completely unimpressed with him when he was on that team. I thought he had a really good resurgence when he came to GE. I thought they did a really good job of making sure that like, he suddenly was making all these flashy plays and suddenly he's everywhere and he's really mobile and he's controlling the pace of the game and he's snowballing all his lanes and suddenly like you go to gank but suddenly Lee's there for no reason.
Mm.
And we saw later on in the season he looked a little bit more uncomfortable, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think Bengi is really comfortable right now. I think he's kind of in his element. So, I mean, if that's what it comes down to, then yeah, I think that's why I'm picking SKT. I think it's actually because of Bengi, and now apparently I have to like commit suicide or something. So I just said
Pretty
something I
much.
never thought I'd say.
Rest in peace. I will.
I'm going to give you my answer very briefly because we all seem to have a habit of going on tangents. I
Sorry.
think that I'm saying everyone collectively. I wasn't asking you for an apology, Emily. I didn't
still
say
apologize.
Emily has a habit of going on tangent. Anyway, okay. So, I think it's going to be SK Telecom, and the reason why is I think they gave us a pretty good blueprint for how they're going to beat GE against CJ. I think CJ had similar strengths and weaknesses. CJ was they were good at team fighting, even for most of the split. Like that was their thing. Their early game wasn't as good, and SK Telecom abused like this early mid game, like very narrow power spike to beat them. I think they can do the same thing against GE as they can target where because even when GE started working on that aggressive playstyle, their record wasn't that good with it. It was actually pretty bad. So. Yeah, I think SK Telecom will win because like they've shown that they can isolate points in the game where the teams have been weaker and play to those styles regardless of the meta. So, next one, the region that matters now. We've advertised this show as Into the China Talk, and we haven't actually really talked that much about China. We've been hinted at it a little bit, but there were 2 series. Honestly, no one cares about IG versus Snake except to
God.
gloat because Snake got
Woo, IG.
pretty badly manhandled, I think, personally. There was one exception where IG played their composition really poorly. If you care, you can watch the games.
Mhm.
Most people, I don't think, care. LGD versus EDG, the big final match that people cared about.
Mhm.
We saw a bunch of issues, and the one thing is that going into this match, going into the playoffs, especially, no one thought, it was actually a perfectly reasonable thing to say that EDG was not going to drop a single game in playoffs, that they were just going to roll through it. They went to 5 games against WE, but there were a lot of caveats to that, and I'm sure you guys discussed this previously. And they went to 5 games this week against LGD. What happened to EDG? We'll discuss, try to keep it to EDG here. We'll get to LGD next.
One thing I want to apologize about, because I tend to... Holy, this was amazing. Remember the whole Pawn is the best in the world bit? Oh, jeez. Raz's public apology. Because the entire point of that was that I felt like he wasn't showing much. But then when he finally showed... he could play many playstyles. He's willing to play it, but can he actually play it? And the answer is no. His Lulu was not... I know there's going to be a lot of people... There are a lot of people who dislike the idea of mid Lulu, especially when you can just put up to your top laner. And then there are people who was like, oh, why are you playing Gnar? But Gnar is amazing. I love Koro on Gnar. He actually plays around his rage bar fantastically. Pawn, on the other hand, simply does not know his role on his champion. He played... I remember the last team fight in which they were behind, but they had a decent scaling composition. All they needed was Pawn to stay in the back and protect Deft. That's all they needed. And we found him right beside Koro in the deep end of LGD's composition, just ulting himself and trying to deal as much damage as possible. My friends, that is not how you play Lulu. That is not, I don't know, that's... Pawn is... Pawn is not that good. He's a great player, but he is very, very... He needs that specific style for him to really be effective. And then he got Cassidy in the next game, he was completely fine. He was give him Cassidy, and that's how it works.
So do you think this is a problem with Pawn as a whole, or do you think it's because he's maybe had less practice? There are people saying that he can't sit for as long as he's been sitting during the regular split because of his back problems. Do you think maybe that has any contributing factor, or is this just the real Pawn?
I think this is just the real Pawn. I think it's just this playstyle that we've seen throughout Korea and when he came to China. It's always been him. I think the debate's just been that he's grown as a player in terms of his playstyle. He's learned a lot more in a larger environment, you could say. But he's gotten better in terms of... Oh god, no, it's debatable. I think he's gotten a bit better in terms of team fighting, but he's just the same old Pawn at the end of the day.
And I just want to clarify, he didn't lock Imp down in that last team fight with the gold card. Imp totally cleansed that, and he just walked right back into the fight on his own. Congratulations, Imp. Anyway, we're done bashing Koreans because that would make me look like a biased Chinese fangirl. Next, Emily, what do you think went wrong with EDG? Do you think it was all Pawn? What happened?
I actually do think a lot of it was Pawn, but I think it's more if you have and we're gonna take a look at what the team does for Deft, and Deft previously I kind of knew him as this AD carry that sometimes struggled in lane, but then his godly, surreal team fight positioning would always, come through when Samsung Blue began to team fight in the big game. And I feel like Deft, in terms of being slightly more self-sufficient. I think he's become that. I also think his team gives him a significant amount of resources. I think Mako has played really, really well, which has also aided him, obviously. And so I think throughout all that, Deft has really been given like a lot of tools to shine on that team. And I think his integration onto the team went a lot better than Pons. And for Pon, I mean, it always came down to, for me, during the regular season, even when they looked kind of untouchable, Pon was always, you know, sometimes he was off like doing his own thing, and he didn't really like, he was kind of, and I think I brought this up on the show before, but it kind of reminded me of when Inzek was in top lane for KT Bullets, and they'd kind of send him to do whatever he wanted,
Yeah.
and he'd kind of like wander around and like draw the aggro of the entire team, and then the rest of the team would go take Baron, or they'd go get an inhibitor, they'd go do something, and they'd take an objective on the map.
And
And
I
feel
compared him to Darian, so it's
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So there you go. That's another. That's
another
person.
example.
But like that's kind of what Pon. That's the role that he settled into on that team for me. Like he kind of became, because you can't ignore him, right? Because he's still a really good laner. He still can be a legitimate threat, especially on specific champions. So you can't especially ignore him. But when he's being super obnoxious, he can draw attention away from what EDG kind of wants to do as a team. And I think that in the finals, they showed that sometimes that's not always going to work. And I don't know if I know they have been saying he's been getting less practice time. His team fighting overall, like 5v5 team fighting with EDG, was looking better until the illness. So I don't know practice time must have affected him to some extent, but I feel like this finals points out, if you know, like EDG has, if you had to point one glaring weakness that they have, it's that Pon hasn't been integrated into the team as effectively as Deft, in my opinion. So like if you're going to pick on something on that team, you're going to attack Pon's role on and kind of try to take him out of the game. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, even so, like game 5 where he absolutely fed his face off, he was like, even in the last team fight, he got 3 sets of cooldowns off before he died. Like
He didn't die in the last 2 fights, so there you go.
Oh wait, no, was it the one before that? There was a team fight where he got 3 spell rotations off.
Well, yeah,
I'd
he
have
got
to
a lot.
watch,
He got some stuff off. Yeah,
He
he
still
was
had
fine.
he still had an impact, but at the same time, like he was average game 3 and game 4, and Deft carried them to the promised land game 5. So he wasn't spectacular throughout the series, but I don't know. Game 5 was very unimpressive, but he still did okay.
I think like this. Oh, go on. You're going.
Sorry, I will say that I think that the meta has affected Pon's role.
Mm-hmm.
Team fighting more holistically matters more. So
Yeah.
I almost thought that like the U thing was strategic because they wanted to try to play to that style more, and that's traditionally what U's been good at. But obviously it wasn't. So.
Mm-hmm. I think the best part about this series is actually spoken a lot to EDG as a whole is Clearlove and Koro, and I'm trying to I'm starting to question.
I mean, that's like they're the members that were left over from the team that used to win in the late game team fights, right? So.
Exactly, yeah.
They were my all-stars. Oh my gosh, Koro.
And even though that like EDG has just like decided to go for this very difficult to really play team comp for team fights, like they really surround her. Like playing Gnar in team fights, people will dissuade from it in the sense that like you can just play Hecarim ulti, and like it's very like straightforward how you play the champion and how you play those compositions generally. Like EDG's current playstyle, or how they currently play out their champion picks, really, like, I guess if there's one team that can do it, it's them. like it's really complicated in some sense, and sometimes it really didn't. It harmed them. Like maybe in that game that like Pawn was playing Lulu in. Yeah, sure that one it didn't work out for them. But I feel like Koro and Clearlove have always been the pillars, or at least are, for that team. And sure, like Deft will come out and he will carry out the later portions of the game because he's all the damage.
He's the carry.
Yeah, he's the carry. But the actual people who carry that team from the early game onwards is actually literally
Chinese mafia.
yeah, the Chinese mafia.
So let's talk about this because I actually think EDG had pretty good early games and like pretty good late game team fights, but they had weird mid games. Is where I think that they had like their biggest problem is like where LGD. So let's transition more into how LGD got their advantages and talking about where EDG looked weak. So where do we think how do we think that LGD won the 2 games they won?
Oh yeah, go yeah, Emily, go.
No.
Okay. I think it was off of Wayless and Imp play really well. And honestly, the weakness that we've always talked about when it comes to TBQ, like I love the fact that we're talking about TBQ, like Bengi earlier, because TBQ is similar, and that
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
yeah, and that they're pretty much like they have the same champion picks, they have the same play style, like they're I wouldn't say play style per se, but like it's forgiving for them in the early game. It's a lot forgiving for them later on, and like and how they engage team fights and how they carry out their lane presence in general. So, like TBQ, this meta favored TBQ 100%. It helped him in the matchup against Clearlove. And I think Imp did really well. Like he actually, like the moment he got rolling off of like, the moment he got rolling off of those Jinx resets, he just like they cleaned up fights like every time. And Wheeless was like actually just playing Orianna out of his mind. So that team in general just played extremely well to their composition.
I also thought that LGD had some pretty good. I mean, aside from Wayless just being like absolutely ridiculous on Orianna, I think they also had like LGD as a team. They did a really good job in the mid game of controlling objectives and then somehow managed to lose that control to EDG in the late game. So like they'd set up well for like Dragon, they'd take turrets, and then EDG would somehow come back and team fight around Baron, get Baron, and win. And I think that when LGD did well in the mid game, it was because of that. Either Wayless would they'd have like, I'm trying to remember the exact team fight. Like they'd have a team fight in the river at Dragon, and somehow Wayless then has a triple kill on Orianna. So obviously that affects their mid game significantly. And then I did think that they did a good job of setting up for Dragon and controlling the Dragon area for the most part, and then they'd lose it for some reason at Baron. So if there's something that LGD kind of has to figure out, it's definitely that. It's the how do we continue that dominance around mid-game objectives and turn it into focusing more, like transitioning that same team fighting that we had in the river, the bot river, and move it up towards the upper river near Baron and then figure that out. Because somehow I felt like their decision-making at that specific part of the map was kind of iffy sometimes.
I think the biggest thing for me, and call me out if I'm wrong in this sense, I feel like LGD started playing a lot more EDG-esque. Like if they commit to a team fight early on in the game, They commit to
Yeah.
it. They bring numbers. Like it's funny because I remember they literally got quadra killed. Like, they got quadra killed. It kind of gave me like nightmares of GAMT. Um, but that team, like, they really understood that if they were going to team fight or skirmish against EDG, they brought everybody. Like they committed TPs, they brought Wayless from his lane, they tower dove early a little. That was a little bit too far. Maybe that was they pushed their luck in that sense, but they knew what they had to do to be able to win the game, and they all in on that idea.
Okay, so very briefly, my thoughts. I
Yeah.
think it was the strengths of all three teams coming to a head. Early game, EDG could win a lot of these dives and roams because they played that way all regular split. But obviously, the meta doesn't let you win with that as easily anymore. LGD always won because they would compensate for their early game weaknesses with the waves pushing against the enemy team so they could take advantage fights around dragons. So they won through dragon fights a lot in the regular season. And then old EDG, last year's EDG, you did not fight around Baron against last year's EDG. And like a big parts of their team fighting were Korra zone control. Clear Love like team fights really well, sets up the AD carries really well, and then of course Deft is a great like game AD carry. So I thought those like you could see elements of all three of these teams coming through, and I think part of why LGD can kind of do some of these early or game fights and do some of these same roaming EDG-esque styles is because they were already doing a lot of roams to compensate for this weakness that they no longer have to compensate for because TBQ gets buffed in the early meta. And a lot of the late game throws were because TBQ has no idea what to do and team fights still.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, TBQ. He's my favorite player, and everyone's like, "Is TBQ getting replaced?" I've been asking this question for a year and a half now.
Poor guy.
TBQ wasn't this bad. Like he wasn't. He didn't have a Bengi moment though. So this Bengi moment will come maybe tonight in IET.
Oh please, I don't know. Oh god. Maybe actually.
We don't have a
no,
lot of time, so let's do some quick closing thoughts on this series.
That's actually what I was gonna say. I was like, I was really impressed actually with LGD. I feel like they can. I mean, obviously they still lost, but I think they can take away a lot from the series. It was a lot closer than I honestly thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like a 3-1. And I thought EDG was going to look a lot more dominant than they did. So I feel like LGD is a team that, once again, and maybe this is just a running theme for me because I'm tired and my brain is desperately trying to tie all the things I'm trying to say together, even though they don't make sense. But I feel like LGD is a team that really, as Kelsey pointed out, learned how to play with their weakness, who is TBQ. So they developed really good strategy for that, and they worked together as a team to kind of overcome it and make up for it. And then when it came time to play in the finals, they didn't need to cover up for that weakness anymore, and it made them like a significantly more strong team. So if there's any team that can kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, how do we fix this? I feel like LGD is a really smart team, and I feel like they're going to be significantly better when they come back to play.
I think the only thing there are a lot of things you can take away from this. LGD is starting to be an actual like competitor, I guess. I think the major one is that EDG isn't. They have weaknesses, probably. I mean, they've always had weaknesses, but like this is the time that we've actually started to see them like show their weaknesses. That they're actually starting to be competitive, or at least I mean, other teams are starting to be competitive in their own region to them. I think this is a decent preview for any team going into MSI on the styles that they do play and how to actually like commit or respond to EDG style? Like, will they be able to? Will teams be able to respond to that style? Like, I don't think so. Maybe like definitely, probably Korea. But oh, we've seen the blueprint here.
So, I mean, you guys are going to do probably a good MSI show leading up to that. So, after the Korean finals. So, I will let you guys do that. Then, Jacob, closing thoughts on anything in general.
Excited for MSI. Attending the event. Ordered a bunch of camera gear today to be able to do interviews. Yeah, I'm extremely excited. It's my first fall event, so should be great. So be driving down to Tallahassee next Wednesday. So
Oh, you can follow Jacob on Twitter and look for his exciting MSI video interviews. So,
also shout out to the
when they
Daily
come out.
Dot, best publication in the world. So
All right. So I'm going to do a quick bit on IET, which is a tournament tonight that I don't actually recommend anyone watches live because last night they made 3 best of 3s last 12 hours with delays and other games, and they weren't supposed to last 12 hours. So, but LGD versus WE tonight for all you WE fanatics. Get to see them play LGD again and see how good WE are. I think they should both be using their playoffs rosters. So there's that. OMG's playing around with their roster. There's nothing definitive yet about changes to that roster. So these could just be experimentation going forward. During off-season last time they played with Shiyang also. Next
I'm
thing
looking
is that
into
they're
a
playing.
Chinese. I'm looking into a Chinese roster change, but I can't say what yet. So
There's Martin on Snake. There are all sorts of Chinese roster rumor changes. I do
Yeah.
not recommend that you report on Chinese roster rumors, any would-be reporters, unless you have like 5 sources.
oh yeah,
because
obviously, it's a very shot in the dark.
It's a very crazy minefield. Otherwise, yeah, IET. You can watch the VODs on the IET website later. And shout out to the Score Esports for me. Shout out to Daniel Tifa drank us. Hopefully, whatever is ailing him at the moment returns is better next
For his
week.
internet.
Yeah.
Young, successful internet.
So, IET, the reason why I'm excited about IET is because we get to see IG versus LGD. So we get to see maybe IG will have less of a decide to give up in game 2 syndrome
Yeah.
against LGD than they did against EDG, and we might get to see some interesting matches there. That's all I care about. I'm holding out for the finals of IET. Nothing else is really worth watching from my perspective. So,
Showtime though.
Showtime. Showtime is going to take it all, guys.
They got it.
This team that's not even in LSBL. Okay. I think they're going to be in TGA though. Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
this
they
is now LSPL talk.
Don't get
Stuff no one cares about. Okay. Thank you everyone for watching. Shout outs, Raz and Emily, to whatever publications you want to shout out to right now.
LOL Esports. They employ me. And I'm writing about the G Tigers right now, so look forward to
Nice.
that coming out this week. And I did
Woo!
the SK Telecom article last week, so yay!
Nice. Raz.
Raz.
Raz. Oh jeez. Shout out to Team 8. Myself. China Talk.
Okay. Yeah. China Talk, by the way, guys, if you want more talk about LGD, EDG, IET, and Snake versus IG, also roster rumors, will be tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So, yeah, with that, we are signing off.